Hey guys, thanks for joining me for another Dissidia Final Fantasy Opera Omnia video, and today we're going to do my community reaction to the Re-Shinryu stuff. So for those of you that aren't familiar, they, on a very recent Ope announced that they are kind of adding the next level of difficulty to DFFOO on JP. Essentially what this is, it's called Re-Shinryu or Re-Shinryu, and what it appears to be is that they are adding a Lufenia Orb to Shinryu fights, but there is kind of like a little push and pull with that because they are changing the way like enemy force works. So the way enemy force is going to work now is the enemies will still charge up a force gauge, but what happens is when they hit 100%, they'll just do like a force action or a force attack, and then they just immediately go to 0. So they're not going to sit there in like a long force time. So I feel like they're going to focus it more around like if your party can meet the orb condition, you're good. You're not going to have to worry about like canceling it with like a force attack. So knowing that makes me feel like a little bit better about it. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to talk about my initial thoughts about it. And then I'm going to talk about, we're going to read some comments because I made a post on my YouTube page. I said I was going to make this video, and if you wanted a chance to get in the video, I would go through and read some of these comments. My reasoning for making this video is, one, I got a decent amount of comments on it. You can see I've got 34 comments on it, and they've been actually very mixed. So I think it's kind of cool to see like this discussion and like different viewpoints on how this affects players, right? And so I'm going to give my initial thoughts, and then as I read the comments, I'm going to give my thoughts on some of the comments as well. Now, my initial gut reaction, because I was someone that like, I wasn't a huge fan of the Lufenia Orb because I did think some of them were very restrictive. So my initial gut reaction was like, oh no, I don't know if I'm going to like this. But after having some time to like digest the information, understand fully like how the force thing is going to change a little bit. In the end, I think it's going to be a good thing, but I'm going to reserve like my full judgment until we actually see it in practice, right? Because I think the big fear a lot of people have is, which was what my fear was that this could make fights too restrictive. Well, when you think about it, when in just Shinryu alone as it is now, they've had some very restrictive fights, right? We had like the Spiritus Tree where it was essentially you had rains or you had to like find some type of cheese to get it, right? We've had some very restrictive ones that were very limited on the number of characters you could use. We've also had some where it's like you have to deal with the force condition, like you can't ramp fast enough and you have to have a very specific character to hit it, right? So like, you know, you need some crazy force condition that's very specific to maybe one or two characters. So we have had some very restrictive fights. And I think the bottom line is no matter, you know, whether there's force or orbs or whatever, they can make fights more or less restrictive as they please, right? And I think the overall consensus here for me that I'm thinking is, like, we needed a new difficulty anyways, because I think the problem that a lot of players are having with the current gameplay is it can be kind of stale, right? Because what I always talk about is like, if Astos works, just do it. So like if I'm just doing Rosa Aerith Astos, like I'm just ramping, going into Astos Burst, blowing up every fight, it is kind of boring, right? And I think players want reasons to use more of their roster. Now, sure, you could argue, I could just use whatever characters I want anyways, right? You can make up challenge runs, but I think that we want the game to maybe dictate that for us a little bit, because like I'm the type of player that if the game's going to give me the option to make it easy, I'm just going to make it easy. And I think what people are craving is just a more balanced experience for that end game content, right? So I think it's, once again, before I reserve full judgment, we'll wait till we see it. But I will say overall, I like the idea that they are mixing it up a little bit. And if they can do it in a way where it doesn't seem overly restrictive, but does force you to dip into your roster a bit more, I think that's always a good thing. That's why I like lockout content, because it does get me to use other characters. And I like it when the game forces me to do that, right? So anyways, those are my initial thoughts on it. Like I said, we'll see what it looks like when it actually drops in game. But let's go ahead and check out your comments on it and see what you guys are thinking. Now, realistically, what I would like to do is like honor the people who responded first and do it in order, but they like mix all this up. It's all in random order. So I'm going to get to as many of it as I can. And if I can, I would like to maybe get to all of these, right? So the first one here is Bellis. Bellis says, I think it's great, makes fights more interesting, players spending more, the game stays alive. And I would agree with that, right? Because if the game gets too stale and too easy, players will have less incentive to spend. So anything that's going to cause players to maybe summon more on banners, go in for gem packs, whatever, is a good thing. So yes, I would agree with that comment. Zeoname, you had a long previous comment. So let me see if I can just find Zeoname's first comment, and then we can kind of piggyback, because he made two really long comments. Here's another one. So Name says, I'm fine with it if they lower the HP of the bosses to compensate. I don't know if lowering the HP is necessarily the answer because we're still going to have Echo, we're still going to have Force. I don't know that I would want to lower the HP of the bosses. I don't think that's really an issue. Maybe that's the only one you were commenting on. It was just that one. Okay, so let's go back up to Name. So Name just wanted to say that he thinks the HP should be lower. To add to my previous comment, apart from lowering the HP totals, I think this will allow older LD only units to be viable again for orb management without being too restrictive. Being a returning player from the EX era, I have a ton of Lufenia fights to go through, and this is allowing me to experiment. So far, no orb has been so restrictive that it completely cuts off units. Meanwhile, Shinryu fights, the one I've managed to complete so far, between variable force conditions, racing, let me see, the enemy to 100% has restricted me, might be caused by lack of full kin on a unit too. I would agree. It's probably because your box just isn't very big right now. It usually ends up being a charger, a DPS unit that can cancel enemy force time, more often not a banner one. So either Rosa, Yuna, Assos, or whatever. So yeah, I welcome the changes. Okay, so there's some things in here I think I agree with, and some things maybe I would challenge a little bit. So the thing where you're saying that like no orb has really challenged you, I don't really think that that's a valid statement because the state of the game you're playing in, we're not in that era anymore. So to go back on older Lufenia fights and say that they're not restrictive, it's not really a factor because those fights aren't built for force in Shinryu, force and echo and all that. You can ignore any orb condition on a Lufenia fight. It doesn't matter. So you have to think of what those fights were back in the day. And when a lot of these old Lufenia fights dropped, there were some very restrictive ones. I remember Quistis is typically one that's really restrictive because it's like you have to delay by this many turns, very specific things like that, right? But like I said, the fact that there were orbs isn't necessarily bad. It's just when they get too restrictive. So I just don't think you can make a comment on Lufenia fights now in terms of difficulty because we're in a completely different era. Even if you're a new player, you get one Echo character or even just bring in a solid friend and you're going to blow up Lufenias in like a turn or two. So that statement I don't think really matters right now. But once again, it's going to be how they apply orbs in the future, right? Then the comment about like it'll make older LD units more viable, it kind of depends because like in this new era you're still gonna prefer Echo characters if you have them. So I still think the LD only units, it's gonna be similar to how it is now. So LD only units can't really help you handle force conditions now, but they can help you with mechanics of fight. So for example, I could have Galif or Gladio LD only just to give me a tank. Maybe the boss has a very oppressive HP attack and you need some way to kind of tank through it, right? I think when this Re-Shinryu comes out, it's not really going to change. There's not going to be like an LD only character that's more desirable than Echo. It's just going to be if you're a player who doesn't have a lot of Echo characters, but maybe you have the option to get an LD only character to fulfill an orb and it helps you get through the fight. Sure, that definitely could be an option. So I think what you're saying, and I think for the most part I do agree with what you're saying, that like because the orb condition might fit an LD only character and you just don't have an Echo option of it, it will be more chances to use those characters, sure. But we still would probably prefer to use Echo if we can, right? Let me see here. JC says, I don't think it will be too bad for veterans. If it's anything like before, the orb will usually be countered by the newest event character. We need to bring that character into the fight anyway for the free multi-pull ticket, so no real change if you already do those missions every event. But I guess annoying if you're someone who skips the missions. As long as characters work with an LD only to fulfill the orb, that's easy enough to build for. If you've been playing a while, and if you've been playing for a while, you probably have other characters who can fulfill the conditions. If the orbs are asking for specific BT effects or even force echoes, it would be a lot harder and more annoying, and I doubt we'd see that. Yeah, and I think what JC and kind of what Zio was talking about with the LD only characters too, is because to counter the fight, you're not going to have to counter force time with a force. It's just saying that like these LD only characters can be the thing that helps you with the orb, right? So I definitely can see that because you're not limited to having a force to cancel something out. So I do agree with that. And then, yeah, JC, I do agree too that I think like players like me that I'm usually summoning the newest characters anyways, it might not have that big of an effect. Unless it's something where there's a character I really don't want to go in on and they really cater to orb to that character specifically. But if you are a veteran with a large roster, typically you should have multiple options to help with an orb. And the other thing that we've experienced from Lufenia too, it's going to kind of give more value to calls again, because there was many times where we could use calls to fulfill orbs. And in the Shinryu era, we really haven't had to worry about that, right? Like, calls, mainly if you want like a healing option and you don't have a healer on the team, or just really to buff your echo characters or your force times, that's really what we're using calls for now. So I think, as you guys mentioned about maybe giving more value to LD only characters, I think it's also going to give more value to calls. So I think that could also be a good thing. Thomas says, I think this could be great as long as they tune the fights better. The last thing I want to do are these giant slogfest of a fight where the bosses have HP totals that are super high and you have to manage orb conditions. As long as these fights aren't set up to just drag out and then kill you if you make a mistake or get a bad turn order, they sound fun. I actually like the orb conditions as they force you to build teams around them for the most part. Just don't make the conditions force you to only use the current banner characters and give us a chance to pull out some older characters that can also meet the conditions. And I would agree with that, right? I think the orb will force us to dip into our rosters a bit more, but I agree. They got to make sure they don't tune the fight to just like what's on the banner. And if I think back to like the entirety of Lufenia era, I think there's only a handful of times where I felt that way. For the most part, I think a lot of Lufenia fights were balanced. But I think the reason why I immediately got a negative feeling about the Lufenia orb is kind of what he's talking about here. I just have nightmares of these really long fights, and you make one little mistake and it triggers the orb and they pop you, and I just find that so annoying. So once again, we'll have to see. I think what they could do too that would be really fun is there were several fights that the orbs weren't auto kills. So if maybe the orbs ticking to 0 don't always auto kill you, I think then I think it'll be a lot better too. I think they'll do a mix. They'll probably do some auto kill and maybe some that don't. But yeah, it really depends on how they're going to balance that out, right? Guilty Kit says he loves it. I enjoyed Lufenia overall more than Force Era, as fun as it is. Vastly prefer orbs over have this hyper-specific force counter or die fights. I do agree with that. That is annoying where it's like, not even like the specific counter or die. My least favorite thing that they've been doing is you don't die if you don't cancel the force. But like pretty much if an enemy gets a 20 turn force time, it's like a death sentence if you can't cancel it. Because what they've been doing with these 20 turn forces, it's like, yeah, the force is going to last forever, and the enemies either A, can't be damaged, or they do the thing where they heal back like 90% of the damage you do, and it's basically unwinnable unless you cancel it, right? So I really hate that style of like force. So, I like the idea that we're not going to rely on forces to cancel, and by having the orbs, it's really just any character that can help fulfill the orb will work, which once again, people are talking about the LD only characters, which it can give them some more use, and the calls, right? Not that all Shinryu FR fights are like that, but some are incredibly punishing. I agree. Rex Shinryu was agony. Orbs are at least more flexible generally in multiple ways. Can use calls to take it up. Yep, which we brought up as well. So yes, I agree with that. Oh, and I should like this one. I haven't liked that comment yet. Scavenger Punk, man, I feel for newer players. Lufenia orbs traumatized me as a newer player, so I'm just hoping that the orb plus force conditions aren't insanely restrictive. I think I have a good enough box now to handle it when it comes to GL, but I don't like that their solution is boring, repetitive Shinryus, was to bring back an old mechanic that I personally think is just unfun. Anyway, I also saw that Rydia's getting her BT and JP, and in honor of that, I'll use her on the Kelger fight along with Reno just for fun. Also, Penelo's finally getting her BTFR. Oh, I didn't catch that actually. That's awesome. Hopefully they time travel or echo for us. Yeah, I mean, if they are syncing the games, we are going to get it sooner rather than later, right? Also, Minwoo's getting his echo too, man. That's going to be pretty dang hype, huh? Very, very cool. All right, so a couple of things here. I'm not going to worry about newer players. And the reason why I'm going to say, so when I'm talking about Re-Shinryu, I don't think new player like situation should be a concern. And my reason for that is I think DFFOO players, like if you haven't played other gachas, man, we are spoiled in DFFOO. DFFOO is one of the few gachas where you could create a new account, grind up a bunch of materials, you could summon on 1 or 2 banners and fully build units, and you can beat the hardest content in the game. That is not the way gacha games are intended to work. most gacha games, like end game content, you should have to grind for probably months and get yourself into more of a veteran status before you can tackle end game content. So I'm not going to worry about, like, they definitely should not be catering Re-Shinryu to newer players, because you have to remember, this is end game content. So if I'm a new player and I can't beat it because I can't meet the conditions, that's okay. I shouldn't be mad about that. New players, the way a gacha goes for newer players, you just beat the content you can. You enjoy the feeling of building yourself up to get yourself to that next level, right? But a new player should never come in and feel frustrated that they can't beat the end game content. It's just DFFOO's a little bit spoiled because you can get there a lot quicker than other gachas. So I think what Re-Shinryu is going to do, my prediction is this. It's, if you're a newer player, what it's going to do, it's going to punish newer players in the fact that they are going to have to summon for the newest characters, because they're not going to have an extensive box to meet the condition with other characters. But for veterans, I think you're going to have a lot of flexibility, because you can dive into your deep roster and pull out maybe an LD only character or a secondary Echo character who's not featured to meet an orb condition. So to me, that actually feels balanced and how it should be. Let me see here. Akira Kazama has a comment. Very annoyed because it is stressful and difficult for free-to-play players since they have to use specific characters and have enough resources to beat it. So once again, I heavily disagree with this comment. This is what I just talked about. The endgame content should never be designed around... Well, okay, so he's talking about free-to-play. So I guess we'll talk about this in terms of free-to-play. But for new players, like I said, the endgame content should never be designed for new players. Now, for free-to-play... If you're a veteran free-to-play, this shouldn't be stressful for you, because even veteran free-to-play players will still have a large roster and can maybe get by with some older characters. It's mainly newer players, but I don't know. Once again, the orb condition, it's really going to depend on how they balance the orbs. But if you're a veteran free-to-player, I don't think it should be too stressful. It's just going to depend on what characters you have, right? And in the end... this is the goal of the game, isn't it? Like, the game needs more incentives for players to summon. So even though I know free-to-play players and, like, the general population might not like it, they might not like feeling like they need to summon on banners. If a game isn't pushing you at least a little bit, if they're not nudging you to pull, then it's not doing a good job of making money. So I think if there is that little nudge there, I actually think it's a good thing. And once again, we're just spoiled as DFFOO players because this is one of the most generous gachas out there. And part of the reason they can be so generous is their model for making money isn't solely around pulling on banners, which I think is why you can get the end game sooner. It's why, like, free-to-play players who manage their resources well can get by beating all of the hard content in the game, but they want you to maybe buy a costume, the Mog Pass. There's a lot of other perks besides just beating the hardest content that this game has to offer. So I think there's a nice balancing act there. All right, Mason says this will be enjoyable, very challenging, requires you to think. I'm a free-to-play user, been playing since the beginning. For newbies as well, just manage gems wisely, complete the main stories, and use your gems to rack, and your gems will rack up fast. I believe with the full story completion before Shinryu, it should be worth 1 million gems, maybe with Dimensions End included, so use it to your advantage. Yeah, I actually think there's probably around 2 million gems in the game. If you go through and you calculate in all of the, like, summon boards, all of the divine boards, I feel like there's a lot of gems to be had in this game. And I like Mason's point here, right? It's like, if you're a newer player, just rack up your resources, pick certain banners, focus on certain characters, and you can get a lot done in this game with 1 or 2, like, really good sets of characters to get content done. Now, what the orb is going to prevent you from doing, it's going to stop you from making one team, right? So, like, let's say I was a brand new account, right? And I built up Aerith, Rosa, and Astos, and that's all I had for built up characters. I'm going to be able to beat like 95% of the game with that team. But as new fights start to cycle in, there's going to be things that I just simply can't deal with. And we're seeing this with the weekly crystal quests, right? This whole reason why players need to re-roll, because within your crystal color, you might not have a good way to deal with some of the mechanics. So it's going to cause you to re-roll for other stages. Well, like this, it's going to stop like a newer player from just getting one ridiculous team and riding that for like a year. You're going to have to pull for other characters to kind of get by, right? Techno Hippie Guy. I think it's fine as a free-to-play player, having completed almost all content maxing that provides gems since roughly March, April of this year, maybe later, when Zack and Rubicante came out. Except Dimensions End, a few 6-man and maxing characters. I've managed to acquire full kits for almost all of the banners since that time, and green, blue, roughly half of them. And I only had $5 Mog Pass for the last month and a half. Yeah, so this is a good point, right? Just showing how generous the game is. Trust me, guys, I spend money on the game, but a lot of my gems that I have are actually free to play. Like, a lot of my resources are. My account could be pretty much where it is without spending money, other than things like, you know, the sparkles and stuff like that. But in terms of like my roster and my characters, I could have like a very similar type of setup, probably some less characters here and there, but I would have just been a little bit choosier about what I pulled on. But I definitely have no doubt that if I were completely free to play, that I could have gotten by and beaten every hard content in the game. The reason why I spend money and pull for more is because I really enjoy the game and I want to enjoy more characters, right? This game is unbelievably generous, and it's what got me to give into the Mog Pass. I'm a little worried now, though. Gonna slow down dramatically right about now, but I'm finally figuring these fights out effectively and have the roster to handle most challenges, save for some unique FR requirements. The best game genre I found 100%. Yeah, for sure. This game is awesome. So yeah, I agree with a lot of those comments. All right, can I tackle this name? Oh my gosh, let me see here. Let me just see. I'm going to say Nye Rager Man Jensen. Is this like a SpongeBob? What is that, Jaegerman Jensen? I think you're doing like the Jaegerman Jensen thing from SpongeBob. All right, I hated Lufenia Plus. Granted, Lufenia Shin fights would be more engaging and not just charge Echo Blow-Up bosses. I agree with that. It would suck for free-to-play and even moderately new players, as enhancement points are the new currency. It feels like having that kind of fights with an orb is going to be really hard on those points unless you buy the premium pass. Yeah, everybody's account, it's going to be different where you're at. But once again, in terms of like moderately new and like free to play, like this should be like very difficult endgame. And I think a lot of like the really old veteran players would probably argue that a majority of the Shinryu fights are too easy, right? And once again, if you play other gachas, think of like what endgame content looks like. And it's normally not this easy. So I think, once again, as a community, we've been a little bit spoiled here. And I think we can't really judge the fights until we see how they're going to balance them, right? So right now, I'm just going to look at it kind of optimistically in that, you know, not needing force to cancel, I think, is a good thing, because then you're not tied to a force weapon. And having the orb will maybe actually give you more flexibility, and it might allow the devs to be more creative with how they develop the fight. So we'll have to wait and see, though, once again, before I fully judge it. Let me see. Kara Sumanaka says, that's awful. People don't want super restrictive fights. With less freedom, will feel like pulling less outside of the meta. So here's the thing. If the fights are super restrictive, I do agree with you, but we don't know how restrictive they're going to be yet. And I think, too, like, my gut reaction was not... It was before I understood that they were going to take away force time from the enemies. Taking away force time from the enemies, because I think, and that's probably what a lot of people are thinking of in the comments here, thinking that we have to deal with force effect of the enemies, and we have to worry about canceling the force on top of dealing with orbs, but it really does sound like we're just dealing with orbs, so we'll have to wait and see. Eamon B. Fresh says, I'm not a fan personally. I took a break from the game and came back in early Shinryu days. At that time, all I was good for was Lufenia and below, but Lufenias were major pain. I had very few characters built to EX, not to mention blue level 50 BT. Having to constantly build a character to do a new fight sucks. I'm able to do most Shinryus now, but new players are going to have it rough. Not only do you have to fight the FR to cancel, so that one was one that we didn't realize, but you actually will not have to cancel the FR, is my understanding. They may also force you to bring a separate character to feed the orb in the worst case scenario. This could also force use of LD only characters, which could make fights last a lot longer. I would agree that so here's the thing, they're never going to force you into an LD character, because they're always going to tie it to the newest character. So you will always have an Echo option, but you may have to pull for it, right? But LD only, the way I would consider LD only characters, they're going to be budget options to try to squeak you by an orb if you don't want to pull for the new character. That's the way I would think about it, right? Once again here, though, you know, talking about Lufenias being a pain, but it's because your roster isn't there, right? So if you have very few characters built to EX, yeah, you're going to struggle with everything. So I think, you know, your complaints revolve more around not being at veteran status rather than, you know, how the fights are actually built. So yeah, endgame content should kind of suck for newer players. I'm not going to lie, right? Like, it should. Because new players shouldn't be able to beat these right away. Once again, we've been spoiled, right? So I'm going to go a little bit faster because I'm just repeating myself a lot. Let me see. Nix Zebek, I don't know, NYXZEBQ, however you pronounce that. As long as the orb requirement doesn't have to be a specific character, it's fine. Otherwise, it's worse. Yeah, and I don't think they're going to make it to just one character. Let me see. Jeffrey Erickson says, I called this a while back on Reddit. There would be Shinryu plus difficulty with Lufenia orbs. Yeah, and they actually did do this once. So I believe it was April Fools. They did the whatever fight with Squall. And they did a Shinryu with the Lufenia orb. And I actually think that was their way of testing out, to be honest. All right, and Zio, we already got that. Very cozy, my boy, very cozy. No more brain off. It's time to wake up and be creative again. Let's go. Yeah, very cozy. I'm kind of leaning with your mindset. To just be excited that maybe it's going to get us to try out different team comps. And I think that is kind of exciting. It's why I like lockout content. Because I do feel like I am getting a little brain dead. I like my Rosa Aerith combo. And I just bring in a DPS and blow up the fights right now. Greatness Z Gaming. It's all right. Challenge accepted for sure. We'll see how it's going, right? Jesus Flores is going to be annoying but doable. And once again, can be annoying. But I don't think every fight is going to be annoying. I think it's going to depend. I'm guarantee you guys there will be some stupid, restrictive, annoying fights out there, but hopefully they don't do it too much. Let's see. Dux ZT says, if you've been playing for a long time with a good range of fully built roster, then it will be enjoyable. Otherwise, more free-to-play will disappear since you can't complete the fights to earn resources, and no resources means can't max characters. Can't complete fights, no resources equals infinite loop. We'll have to see how they are doing this. I think this game does a good job of giving players enough resources with what they can complete. We have to get out of this mindset, right? If you're free to play or new, you just have to go into these games without the mindset that you're going to beat everything. It is okay not to beat the hardest content, and you still will earn resources. You will still be able to build up characters over time. Everybody will get there. Okay, so I think we just have to have that mindset that, you know, if you are like a fresher account when this comes out, or you don't have a lot of built-up characters, just don't expect to stomp these things, right? Jose says, finally some challenge. Crystal Rose, it seems fun, but I mean, I feel bad for free-to-play players because they need to use specific characters. Once again, how specific it's going to be, we don't know. But if it's like original Lufenia, I think for the most part, you could get away with a range of characters, but there were some very restrictive fights. We just have to see how restrictive it gets. Scarf says the challenge begins. Let me see. Cal Morsi says, that is when I quit. My life is busy enough to spend more time grinding, pull more characters, and create complex teams. I mean, yeah, everybody's different, and that's why I do my coast teams, because I don't have a lot of time. So I will do my busy teams. But yeah, if I really want to beat a fight, I will find time to try it over and over again and get it done. Full Frontal says Astos goes BT phase and just wreck this easy. Here's the thing, Full Frontal, and this is why, and this is maybe the part you're missing. The thing that the orb is going to kill, it's going to kill force charging. Because if I'm trying to ramp with Aerith, and if her ramping does not tick the orb, you're going to blow yourself up. So I think why players are excited about this, it's going to stop the mundane pattern of ramp, force, little bit more ramp, BT phase, kill, right? It's going to stop that constant thing. So what it's going to do, it's going to force you to engage with the fight more, and it's going to slow down the fight a little bit, which I think could be more fun, right? The Donatus is got a comment here. It's not good. It's more restrictive and doesn't add much complexity. So far, Shinryu gauges and Lufenia orbs serve the game function, albeit Lufenia orbs do it much more, and that is to force you using a certain character. You need a certain character to cancel force or to increase orb. Having both mechanics barely changes anything, just brings the character they want, and both things will be resolved. So, once again, I don't think we're going to have to cancel the FR, but I think what you're saying is if you did have to cancel both, your assumption would be is that the same character would handle both mechanics, which I would agree with, right? I would argue, though, that it can add complexity to it. Once again, it depends on how creative they are with the orbs. They could do multiple characters with multiple orbs, which would definitely add more complexity to it. You know, the more I think about it, I don't know necessarily that it has to mean that it's more restrictive, right? Because there's no reason a Lufenia orb couldn't be the same restrictiveness as bringing a specific force, right? In some ways, it could be less restrictive because you don't have to have a echo to do it or have to have a force attack, right? I think it's just going to vary from fight to fight, right? It's just like anything else. Some will be more, some will be less. Greatness Z chiming in again. Feels like whatever Shinryu. Yep, that's the one I referenced, the April Fool's one. Big Tatsu. I love it. Team comps becoming important again instead of brain dead gauge charging strats. Yeah, see, this is the comment that really made me think like, yeah, I do really agree with what people are saying here for the people that like it because, you know, I don't really think about it, but yeah, the fights have been kind of brain dead lately, right? So I do kind of agree with this. And the thing is when I do hit a really challenging fight, it can be annoying that I can't beat it, but it also feels more rewarding when I do, right? And ultimately, isn't that what endgame content should be? Something that gives you a little bit of a challenge, or at least enough of a challenge that you don't just beat it immediately your first try, and then you feel more rewarded when you get it done, right? Boy, Hada, the game has been brain dead for a while. Fast forward to the global ASAP. I think this is definitely going to time travel. I mean, everything's time traveling, so we're going to see this sooner rather than later, I would agree. That's not new anymore. Remember Squall? Yep, so he's referencing the Squall one. And prepare for trouble. Make it double. I don't like it. Nana Fox doesn't like it. So yeah, anyways, guys, feel free to comment on this video and give me more thoughts on it. And, you know, for those of you that maybe didn't know, does the fact that you don't have to cancel the force condition maybe change your thoughts on it? Are you a little bit more open to the orb? I do think, like, I'm going to reserve my total judgment on it until we see it. But right now, I'm going to lean optimistic and say that it's a good thing because as long as it's a difficulty spike and it causes us to use our roster more, I think it is a good thing. And if it's going to make the fights less brain dead, I do agree that it's going to be a good thing overall. So let me know what you guys think. Thanks for watching. We'll catch y'all on the next one.